So welcome to this fifth installment of our study of the Great Medicine. And like I was just saying before, please recognize the value of this, not just in terms of our own path, but in terms of the suffering there is in this world. And this is what we generally in Buddhism would regard as the highest teaching, actually. Sakya Pandita, a great master of the Sakya tradition, one of the 5 founding fathers, he said, the great perfection, you can't really talk of it as a vehicle. This is the absolute realization. So we shouldn't underestimate what we are studying here. We've so far looked at the gradual path of how it processes our mind. It deepens our understanding, identifies how confusion occurs, and enables us to go beyond confusion. And from that point of view, we could gradually remove these veils. But at the same time, there is a way that we could recognize the abiding, innate condition of wisdom as it exists, even in our confused state. And that's particularly if there is devotion, if there is respect, if there is something where we, you could say, our ego fixation sort of is willing to give up, or we actually see through the hopes of ego fixation. And what particularly enables that is then the devotion to the embodiment of enlightenment, our teacher. So we say that with the mingling of 2 minds, essentially due to the presence of devotion from the student and compassion from the teacher, then something extraordinary can take place, which is the quality of something we call blessing. When the conceptual mind, it opens, it gives way. And in here, it's possible that there is some recognition of an innate abiding quality that is not tainted by confusion. So this is what the proposition is, what we're going to be looking at here. All right. Now, the verse reads, relax in the continuum of primordial simplicity, which is the absolute nature that remains since the beginning. The natural state, the expanse endowed with the 3 doors of liberation, emptiness, absence of characteristics, and absence of intent. Now, I'd like to say again just something about this, which is that this kind of teaching, it requires apprenticeship with someone, an actual teacher. And of course, us doing this in Siddhartha's intent, there's some implication that we have a teacher. And if not Gyaltsap Rinpoche or Trungpa Rinpoche or whoever it might be, then there are many great teachers alive, and we should recognize that this is a very real process of working with ourselves. So again, and it's also not something we just do obviously overnight. So with this present study, this is a bit sowing a seed. It's something we should return to. Like I always like to say, I'd like to, with these studies, that you who participate here, you get a sense of ownership with this work. So it's not a book that sits on the shelf in a nice virginal condition, but ideal would be that this sort of becomes a used manual. And also that it's something that really is revered. We could very well refer to something like this book here as what we sometimes call a relic of the Dharmakaya, meaning it's a precious manifestation of the highest truth. So as we revisit these teachings again and again, then further dimensions of truth and relevance, they continually come up. Now, this continuum of primordial simplicity, It's obviously not something that can be grasped. It does not have anything objectifiable about it. It cannot be perceived. And it's not something that we could wish for the very simple reason that we already have it. What it needs to, however, is be unveiled and actualized. We need to see it. And we need to be aware that this is not something where we can grasp onto it with our expectation to see, ha, I got it. If you look at someone like great teachers like the Dalai Lama, they will famously always be talking about their lack of any, you could say, great qualities such as wisdom and so forth. And that's in a way our, you could say, guarantee for the authenticity. If someone says, hey, yeah, I got it here, it sounds as if it possibly has become a credential for their own confusion or their own clinging to a self. So this is the scope of that which is beyond the confusion of clinging to a self. But again, we are approaching this as something doable because this is our innate abiding condition. And the premise for this entire path, of course, is that we are curable. The condition is curable. We have the medicine. Now we're going to, we're in the process of taking the medicine. Then you will see the radiant Buddha nature, in which all fabrications and workings of mind are at peace in the absolute expanse. So, the ultimate nature is peace. Realization of this depends on the path. See, when emptiness, or the nature of reality, is realized, we're talking about something in which all conceptual constructions, all speculation and so forth has come to an end. We say that these are pacified. And this is then Dharmakaya realization, the body of truth or dimension of truth. But to actualize this, as we were just saying before, in terms of taking the remedy, we have to ourselves go beyond all these conceptualizations, see through them through the practice of the path. And this, of course, is where we approach this in terms of the three wisdoms, listening to the teaching, reflecting on the teaching, seeing how it applies to us, and meditation. Now we talk about uniting appearance and emptiness. Actually, they can't be united because they've never been separated. But the thing is, we tend to look at appearances and we miss the point that they're actually not ultimately objectifiable. We miss the point of their emptiness. And then sometimes when appearances don't hold up what we expect them to be, then we fixate on emptiness and we ignore the, you could say, vivid aspect. So we'd want to understand that this understanding reality is really understanding the middle way that neither falls into holding things as truly existing, absolute, ultimate, eternal, nor that there's nothing there. It's just meaningless, directionless, blank. So it's neither of these. So that's hence the title of this section here, Uniting Appearance and Emptiness. It's really just that we see the unity. It says, empty by nature, it is free from eternalism. Cognizant in its expression, it is free from nihilism. Although one thus considers two aspects, it is the basic nature in which all notions of dualistic perception are freed in their own space, inconceivable, ineffable, apprehended by wisdom alone. So, like we looked at before in terms of the three doors of liberation, there's nothing that we can grasp or objectify. We say it's empty. So we would never fall into what we call eternalism, which is this, you could say, philosophical or habitual project of clinging to something as absolute. Nothing there to cling to. That's the secret, if you like. And at the same time, this lack of anything objectifiable or graspable doesn't mean that there's not something there. There is natural cognizance. So it's not nihilism, it's not nothingness either. Now, the nature of this can be understood, obviously, as we're discussing it right now, but to truly assimilate and, you could say, realize this beyond the ordinary grasping mind is when we say it's not known by the intellect, but by wisdom. So these two are really important, and this also falls into what we call the middle way, that we can see there's in the third Karmapa, Rangjung Dorje's prayer of Mahamudra, it says there's what is it again? There's nothing to be grasped. Even the Buddhas have not seen it. It's also not nothingness, because this is the basis for all of samsara and nirvana. So we can't deny there's vivid presence, and at the same time there's nothing that we can grasp about it. So gradually, through the practice of the path, we eliminate this grasping, or we see through the hoax of this grasping. And that's where something that is not grasping recognizes it. This we could call wisdom. Uncompounded by nature, seen without seeing, as when gazing into Vajra space, it is called seeing the sky of the Absolute. So, again, this nature cannot be seen by the senses. There's not something that we are seeing as an object. There's no one there saying, I am seeing this. There's actually no act of seeing in the conventional sense. It's like if we look at the sky. If we look out, we also don't actually, we're just looking into, you could say, the absence of solid form, the space. And if we investigate the one who's looking, cannot find anything, the division between subject and object don't apply. So the act of the looking itself falls away. So we do have, again and again, in the pith instructions from the likes of Saraha and so forth, the referring to the great seeing of not seeing anything. So this is definitely non-confusion. So it's not as if we're blind. It's not as if we're just, it's not sophistry where we're playing with words. But it's just that this is a recognition, a wisdom, a non-delusional condition. But it's not that there's something that constitutes this non-delusion. It's also here where we go wrong when we think in terms of this nature as something where we have to grasp on and find something, our wisdom or our rigpa or our whatever. It's not like that. This is seen through non-seeing. So about this nature then, Shechen Gyaltsap says, there is nothing to dispel, nor the slightest thing to add, looking perfectly at perfection itself. Seeing perfection, one is perfectly liberated. Buddha nature needs no alterations. It is spontaneously perfect. The practice is to rest in the wisdom that recognizes this nature. Here, confusion, the path, and liberation are merely conventions. So Buddha nature needs nothing added or anything subtracted or removed. Buddha nature said that it is not improved in nirvana, it's not ruined in samsara. It cannot be spoiled, it cannot be improved, it is primordially perfect. For the meditator, who has the confidence that comes from being processed through the path, and who has accumulated wisdom and merit, the practice of simply resting with the wisdom that recognizes this nature. The practice is then resting in this nature. So from the point of view then of this nature itself, when we talk about the path, when we talk about liberation and so on, all of these are just conventions that we use in terms of from our vantage point. So these are not absolutes. It's really just like as we are being treated, we of course talk about the treatment, we talk about us as patients and so forth, but once we're treated, we don't no longer refer to these references as treatment or ourselves as patients and so forth. So Rabjam Rinpoche says, when we look without dualistic clinging, when we look perfectly at Buddha nature, perfection itself, we will be liberated. So when we see this, when we're no longer caught or you could say deluded, then we're free. I'm just turning off the webcam also because it takes up a lot of broadband, which means later if we're looking at the revision, then they become these very large files. When tangible things and intangible things cease to remain present in the mind, in the absence of other alternatives, naked of all concepts, this is complete peace. Nothing has true existence, neither tangible or intangible phenomena. Freedom from conceptual constructs allows peace. Now, some of these things actually were discussed in the previous chapter. Now, the previous chapter on absolute bodhicitta very much operates with what we call the second turning of the wheel, which is the Prajnaparamita teachings on emptiness. So this is where we deconstruct. This is where we see that phenomena don't have anything ultimate about them. And that goes for both, you could say, the objective phenomena, the things that we see out there, and also the one who is looking, our person. None of this has any ultimate reality. They're conditions. And so we appreciate this. And what we, with the paramita approach, achieve is the freedom from concepts that we eventually, and that is through the entire gradual path that well could take eons, that we gradually are freed from this delusional practice of fixating on self and other. So this is, you would say, the nature of the third turning of the wheel is that we appreciate this lack of intangible, tangible and intangible things. There's no essence in these. And we want to first gain an intellectual certainty about this. And then as we apply that, then we go beyond the intellect and we gain experience through meditation then in not being caught by the constructs of our dualistic perception. So when we practice meditation, we become, you could say, familiar, comfortable of actually sitting free from such reference points. We can experience unconditional peace. So of course, meditation practice is not done on the premise of our expectation. Meditation is sobering up, if you like. There's nothing there that entertains us. But at the same time also, it's the place where we have some sense of reality, that we become comfortable with our reality, our subjective and objective reality. So now, unaware of this vital point, to painfully nail down your mind with mental fabrications is not calm abiding, shamatha. To construct intellectual boundaries is not insight, vipassana. So shamatha, calm abiding, is non-distraction. It's not suppressing thought. Vipassana, insight, is experience that emerges from such calm and is not owned by, you could say, doesn't constitute credentials for the ego. This insight gives us insight into freedom from conceptual constructs. So Shechen Gyaltsap or Rabjam and Shechen says that this stanza here, this sloka, is from the Way of the Bodhisattva, from the Wisdom chapter, and it tells us how not to do. Without being clear then on the nature of the path, and this is of course why we study and gain some, you could say, sophistication, and we gain some awareness. We inoculate ourselves against, you could say, naive assumptions about the path. But this prevents us then from wasting our time and having some idea of what it means with wisdom. We need to first then experientially calm the mind. So very often we have teachings that refer to shamatha, but we actually need to do it. We need to sit down and become calm individuals. When then mind is calm, we become clearer, and this allows insight, which is vipassana. Calm in itself is not an objective, and this we see again and again in teachings. But at the same time, just having insight and understanding, if it's not grounded, then it just becomes, you could say, fascinating perspectives that we sometimes have and sometimes don't. And then we have the frustration of not having it and so forth. So we have a lot of brilliant people, especially in our culture. We kind of celebrate sort of the brilliant people who go through tremendous pain. In the Buddhist tradition, we talk about the two extremes of the dumb meditator and the crazy intellectual. And these two extremes we want to avoid. So we want to join these together. Describing shamatha, Rabjam just says, we want to not suppress our thought. That's not the point with shamatha. It's just about, you could say, cultivating a mind that is free from wandering as we're sitting. So he says, in an effort to stop the mind from wandering in meditation, practitioners sometimes forcibly try to suppress thoughts or create an artificial sense of calm. This is not calm abiding. And we could say rather calm abiding shamatha is to provide the conditions for the calm in which natural insight, vipassana, can emerge, where we could experience freedom from the grasp of our conceptual constructs. And this is again also something that's untainted by any display of perceptions. And there's nothing there that we are grasping. So the nature as such is not an object to be known. There's nothing definable about it. And as we already have it, it's not something we need to seek. To see perfectly the inconceivable absolute nature without any intellectual fabrications is an example of pristine wisdom. So with deep respect, an instruction can give us a clear picture of what it is to be realized. If we can hear something from a teacher and so on, this gives us some idea. Then we need to train in meditation, experiencing resting in equanimity, and only actual experience leads to realization. So Rabjam here says, we may have been introduced to the idea of the absolute nature by a teaching or the instructions of a teacher. This idea is like an example that points at something but is not the thing itself. So we have an idea, and based on that we have some idea where we're heading. And this is where we need to put it into practice. We need to understand this is not an object of understanding in a conceptual sense. This is something that we need to taste. So this is where we train in meditation. We train in remaining in equanimity. And that is what leads to realization. We're also not talking here about some incredible satori all of a sudden, but we're talking about once I was in a Japanese temple and they had a little teaching there for people beginning to meditate, and it was called Inch by Inch Buddha. And also once attending some teaching of Jigme Khyentse Rinpoche. I remember him saying, we don't know about nirvana, but we certainly can know about the improvement that happens on a very immediate level when we're not caught by our rigid um, assumptions and our ignorance and so forth. So when we're not caught in destructive emotions and so forth, then we begin to gain some experience of this freedom from conceptual constructs. This is not ultimate realization, but it's more than theory, so it constitutes experience. So we don't practice shamatha and vipassana, calm abiding and insight, as two different things. We explain them differently in terms because to understand the whole science around non-distraction needs to be explained clearly. But at the same time, and Vipassana is explained in different ways, but these actually, interestingly enough, they happen inseparably. So particularly in the Kagyu and Nyingma traditions, we very much emphasize right from the start the unity of these two, shamatha vipassana. So Shechen Gyaltsap here writes, beyond this, the supreme absolute wisdom, the field of understanding of the sublime beings who have reached the state of unity, the meaning of the primordial union of insight that brings about the wisdom of tranquility, of remaining in the continuum of the natural state, will be realized by the power of the Guru's pith instructions. So like I said before, actual meditation unites shamatha and vipassana, and such meditation then really requires that we're not just picking it up from a book, but there is some teacher, and ideally a great realized teacher, who then gives us some pith instruction, what in Sanskrit is known as upadesha. And for us to really benefit such instruction, we need to have some respect, some deep, profound respect. So when we unite these two, shamatha and vipassana, we gain some valid experience of our mind. And at that point, we're experiencing, we're not philosophizing. We're not being distracted. We're not glossing over or suppressing thoughts, which is very much how we deal with our various states of mind, right? When they're uncomfortable. Here we are facing the music and we're becoming quite comfortable with it. So applying the particular practical instructions, known as then pith instructions, upadesha, we can penetrate to an experience of uniting shamatha and vipassana. This is something we don't get from books. Books, they can offer us information, but wisdom is entirely beyond mere linear and intellectual ideas. So to assimilate this, there has to be this very living tradition or this living situation of feeling some deep appreciation. And of course, we could be reading a work by somebody we deeply respect, but that's it. That also constitutes, you could say, devotion. So we're reading a work by a sutra or some text of some great master. There is this deep appreciation. That also is devotion. But also to have some transmission from somebody living, somebody whose face we see and where we can see awakening embodied. This is immensely valuable. And this is really the foundation of Vajrayana, which is then the immediate presence of enlightenment, where we see enlightenment embodied in a teacher. So if there is such a situation, then the teacher can penetrate our confusion and can guide us to realization. Okay, if there are any questions. Somebody seems to not be able to see the slides. Does anybody else have that problem? Can you guys see the slides? Everything should be working as it normally does. Oh, good. All right, that's reassuring. I hope the person managed to fix the situation. If not, it'll definitely be there in the recording. Well, that's good. Any questions about the subject matter? Is it clear? This this that can't be seen. Have you seen it? Anybody managed to get a picture of it? Okay. Yeah. Very good question. Someone says, I'm still wondering if the teacher really has to be alive. You're referring to Trungpa Rinpoche. He has passed. That's right. And we also have continually relating to teachers who are no more. And I would say, I think we should regard these teachers as being beyond time and space, and we should regard them as, you could say, innately present and alive within our Buddha nature. At the same time, also, it's very helpful to have somebody there who can encourage us and sometimes cut through our deception, sometimes stimulate us, and that's where it's very helpful to have a living person. So we both relate to living teachers and also lineage masters, and that's where it doesn't actually, also with thanks to people like Matthew Ricard, there's a lot of really wonderful photographs of Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, and we have pictures of masters who have passed away, and these pictures very often speak to us. So at that point, I think we should regard this as a blessing, and similarly, also with the writings, we read something like "Words of My Perfect Teacher" or the songs of Saraha, and we kind of get some blessing from that. So that we should value that, but at the same time, also we we need a teacher. Someone is asking, uh, who will insult us or cut through our confusion if there's not a living teacher? Well, that's right. To some extent, we can pray to, you could say, teachers that we can't perceive. And then you could say we operate very much with the sense that prayer will be fulfilled. But at the same time, yes, we do need somebody physically there. That's very helpful. But then again, we can't be with the physical person all the time. So we're also taking, once we've spent some time with the teacher, received some upadesha, we still continue our relationship with them, even when they're not there. Is the blessing then the upadesha? No, we would say upadesha, actually, it's funny, blessing is more an opening that can take place. And once there's that opening, we can receive what we call upadesha. Well, we can receive blessing, we can receive empowerment, and we can receive upadesha and so forth. But it's upadesha, we would say, can actually bring enlightenment. So it's slightly different. Blessing is when you could say the conceptual mind subsides. It's opens up, is awed, and there is something extraordinary that goes beyond the conceptual. Upadesha is more hands-on, and it could well come from a teacher who knows how we are. Then again, some upadeshas also, yes, we receive them in a more institutionalized or formal setting. Would be good to have a teacher accessible to a small community in Robertson. Well, I would say wherever we might be, we should make the effort to go and meet teachers. And then when we've met the teachers, we should keep the memory of the teachers in our heart. And in this way, the teacher something that we keep with us. Is Upadesha always speaking words? No, Upadesha also comes in sometimes written form. And also actually talking in the language of the great perfection, we sometimes refer to Upadesha as particular kind of teachings in the great perfection. But the implication with Upadesha is that it's hands-on instruction, that there's just very few words. So if we've never driven a car before, to get into a car and try to drive it, that requires a lot of information. But if we're already somewhat familiar, then if somebody says, you know, if you're trying to start an automatic car where it's sitting in one of the gears, then you try and turning the ignition, it doesn't work. Then somebody just needs to say, hey, put it into neutral, and then we turn the key, and right away it works. So that's where very, very short instructions can get right to the point. Okay, you should have sound is back. All right. Okay, we'll continue. Good. All right. Meditation experiences tainted by the notion of true existence, whether bliss, clarity, or non-thought, are all deceptive and misleading. If you cling to things as real, you feed samsara and will never transcend the three worlds. Right from the start, meditation is actually an exercise of letting go. We let go of our thoughts, we come back to the breath, we continually are, you could say, exercising this mature approach of not fixating. Particularly, we don't cling to these experiences of bliss, clarity, and non-thought. Dualistic grasping of any kind is the cause of suffering. So, when we begin to cling to experiences, we are perpetuating dualistic perception. And that means really that we are positing me and my object. And accordingly, then we create these corresponding realms of confusion, self-imprisonment, samsara. So the discussion here is, and when Rabjam he explains how the clinging to what inevitably happens the moment that we're meditating, that we're not following after the thoughts, then inevitably we have some sense of feeling good, some comfort, bliss. We all of a sudden we have insights, clarity, and also we're not feeling conflicted. We're comfortable, whether we have thoughts or not. There's some, you could say, freedom from the thoughts. So if we then begin to cling to these experiences, that's again creating this dualistic setup. And then we have, as a result, these various realms that are known as the realm of desire, the realm of form, and the formless realms. This is really just a way of classifying the entire samsara. So, but generally talking about the higher realms though. So it's important that we let go even of these positive experiences, as the thing about these pleasant experiences, they just become new addictions. They become new objects grasped by a subject. And so we're ultimately just creating more suffering if we do that. So that's not how we want to meditate, at least not in the Buddhist tradition. Therefore, with consummate skill, rest in simplicity, letting everything be in a state free of taking things as real, in which the one who realizes, the realized, and the realization become inseparable, like pouring water into water. This is the fundamental nature beyond speech and intellect, the definitive meaning, the transcendent perfection of wisdom that can only be realized through one's own awareness. Be determined to master this understanding. So, if we have this devotion, this appreciation for a teacher, And there is this gap in our conceptuality in which the teacher somehow touches us. We refer to that as receiving blessing. And there also the teacher can, you could say, provide something valuable, encouragement, what we call empowerment. And on the basis of that, there's a sense of us mingling our mind with the teacher's wisdom. And then we rest according to the instructions. If we rest without any attachments or clinging, then the duality of observed object and the observing subject vanishes. We let go of them. It doesn't go away right away, but it has less grip on us. So here we just leave things as they are. We don't need to do anything. So this is where we refer to things like no fabrication, non-fabrication. And we're not creating anything or clinging on to anything. We talk about freedom from conceptual constructs. In this nature, then, beyond conceptual grasping, we arrive. We are on the path to, and we eventually arrive at the objective of the path, which is the transcendent perfection of wisdom. And as much as this might sound very lofty and something that is profound, vast, and so forth, Shechen Gyaltsap, he has in there, he says, be determined to master this understanding. Do it. Now, even though we are talking the great perfection, this is at the same time not different from what you could say the perfection this we just described that we find in the paramita vehicles. So it's not as if the scope, the scope of the great perfection, Dzogchen, is different from what we find in the sutras. What is different is the methods, and there we talk about particular skillful methods. But as far as the nature itself goes, this is something that is common with the sutra teachings. Otherwise, we would have different enlightenment. They would have enlightenment according to the sutras and enlightenment according to the tantras. And this is not the case. It's just that the tantras, they provide some particular skillful methods. But as far as the nature itself goes, that is the same everywhere. And here we have one of the great Mahayana teachers who came to Tibet and was very much emphasizing the most fundamental aspects of the Buddhist discipline, Atisha Dipankara, who was really quite one of the great giants. And he's also the founder of what we call the Kadampa tradition, which later then became the Gelugpa tradition. And here's then Shechen Gyaltsap. He brings in Atisha to really give a sense that this is something universal for all traditions. So he says, in brief, as the protector Atisha said, within the absolute there are no distinctions. There are neither conditioned phenomena nor absolute phenomena. In the face of emptiness, there are no distinctions, none at all. Realizing this without realization is called simply seeing emptiness, seeing what cannot be seen. So it is said in the most profound sutras, nothing to see, no one who sees, no beginning, no end, peace. Utterly beyond, really there and not really there, free of classification and reference point. It does not cease, does not remain, never comes, never goes. It cannot be captured in words. It cannot be expressed. It cannot be viewed. It never changes and has never existed as a solid reality. The yogi who realizes this rids himself of the two veils, the veil of the obscuring emotions and the veil covering all that is to be known. So said Atisha in a work of his called Entering the Two Truths. I would say sometimes we can, as we're meditating, we can sometimes just take a break and we can read something like this. It's not meditation because in a way it's conceptual, but at the same time, just reading something like this really enhances meditation. So we should sometimes do that. Anyway, as far as this goes then, we want to take with us that the absolute has nothing that can be labeled as relative or absolute. It's not known through concepts, yet it is an understanding that sees the unity of appearance and emptiness. It removes the two veils, the veils of kleshas, destructive emotions, and the cognitive veil, what Atisha refers to as the veil of all that can be known. So Atisha here is ascertaining how reality in itself has no labels such as absolute and relative. This experience of liberation has nothing about it that can be classified. There's no subject, object, or seeing. It's not a conceptual object. And this is the realization that is free of these dualistic labels of self and other, appearance and emptiness. Like I said before, it's our confusion that overlooks the constructed nature or the dependent arising of phenomena. And so when we talk about uniting emptiness and appearances, we're just talking about no longer divorcing these two. And when we realize this, we actually get right down to removing two aspects of our confusion, what really lies at the very basis of our confusion. The obvious one is our destructive emotions. But basic to these destructive emotions is the underlying premise, which is clinging to the self. And that self is something that comes about in a moment of unconsciousness, that we space out, we are lost. That is what we refer to as co-emergent ignorance. And so these two veils, first, the basic condition in which we have the co-emergent ignorance as well as labeling ignorance, then we have then the first of the 12 links of dependent arising. And on the basis of that, this clinging to self and other, then we begin to have all the neuroses associated with that, all the strategies of self. And this is what you could say tortures and haunts us and keeps us in samsara. So with this remedy here, you can say remaining in this most basic of all meditations, or not basic, but the meditation that goes deepest, this recognition of the absolute nature, this is something that destroys these two veils. The great perfection is famously what unveils the innate abiding reality, our Buddha nature, and the supreme skillful method that enables us to do this is devotion. It says here the 8 qualities of understanding the ultimate truth are expounded in the sutras, and all this falls naturally into place in the great perfection by pointing out the true nature of mind, which is achieved through direct transmission, effected by the Guru's blessing. So, without going into what these 8 qualities are specifically, Rabjam Rinpoche discusses how all realization is included in the great perfection. And this is the teaching that directly introduces reality itself, the nature of mind. And this is contingent on the devotion of the student and the blessing of the teacher. So, pointing out this nature of mind can really only happen for someone who is not caught up in dualistic fixation. So we're talking about somebody who either is very receptive or has been somewhat processed through the practice of meditation and has gained some confidence in freedom from conceptual constructs. But in just merely pursuing this, what we call the path of vipassana, it would take a very long time to actually gain certainty in the nature of wisdom. So we talk about the devotion to the teacher then, that is seen as the Buddha. And with this kind of devotion, it puts an end to ordinary concepts. We are awed, overwhelmed, and deeply appreciative of the teacher's qualities. And such a situation allows for the teacher's wisdom to penetrate the student's heart. So this we can call blessing. So with the blessing, transmission of the Guru's wisdom to the student's mind takes place. And the true nature of mind is introduced, where wisdom is seen clearly, untainted, and free from ordinary concepts. So we also have in this famous quote from the Way of the Bodhisattva, the 9th chapter, the absolute is not the scope of the intellect. And Shechen Gyaltsap here says, this is not within the scope of ordinary minds, and those who are experts at discursive thoughts will have no taste of it. Absolute truth, arisen from itself, is realized through faith alone. So it is said. So we say deep trust and faith is essential for this kind of realization. This is something that all teachings agree on. Also in the Chan tradition, we talk about what is it again? The Faith Sutra. I forget the Chinese name, but faith is something that is essential in that it's this deep, intuitive insight that establishes our certainty. In fact, we operate with it, even though we might claim to be rational beings. We choose what it is we want to be rational about, essentially on the basis of faith. So we shouldn't underestimate. But here then, faith is more than just being opinionated or having a particular inclination or intuition. It's really about this deep respect and awe of truth, you could say. It's something that is based not on our reference points, but it's you could say truth beyond any, you could say, self orientation. And then we have this story of Paltro Rinpoche and his student Nyushul Lungtok. So this is really far beyond just ordinary, study. This is not something academic, and we in the teaching then, Rabjam Rinpoche, he recounts the story of Paltro Rinpoche and Lungtok Tempe Nima. So I'll leave that up to you to read that story. But it's a very famous story. It's a very beautiful story. And it happened not so long ago. And you can still go and visit this place where this actually took place, next to the Dzogchen monastery. Therefore, hold on to the vital force of devotion that sees the Guru as Dharmakaya, relaxed into unbroken, pristine simplicity, and you will realize the essential meaning. So the key element of such practice is the pure view of the teacher as the Dharmakaya. The teacher's qualities are equal to all the Buddhas, but his kindness exceeds that of other Buddhas. Merging with the wisdom of the teacher, you will realize the nature of mind. So we mingle with the teacher's wisdom and settle in a relaxed simplicity. Sustaining this at all times and under all circumstances is what will enable the final collapse of confusion. And we have a story of when Milarepa was taking leave from Gampopa. He asked Milarepa when he would be qualified to help others. And Milarepa replied that when, in addition to perfect realization, an unusual degree of devotion to the teacher would arise, that would be the sign that he could begin to teach others. So devotion is something that is essential. And also one time I was privileged to receive empowerment from a great Dzogchen master called Tugu Rinpoche. And as he was, you could say, invoking the lineage, he actually had to stop because he was crying. His students had actually mentioned this to me. I had forgotten, but I saw it myself. Tugu is choking up with his deep devotion. So he had to just pause in the giving the empowerment. So for me, this was really a clear reflection of the extraordinary devotion that is not just, you could say, something that one does when one is feeling inferior and the guru is all wonderful, but very much something that arises within realization also. Increased devotion arises as an expression of realization. Now, chapter 10, deviations from the view. If you miss this vital point and complacently believe that you have not strayed into heretical deviations, or claim that you make no assertions, or cling to emptiness as a bare nothingness, that is not the middle way. If you fail to destroy the mental fixations of a materialistic point of view, you have strayed even further from the middle way. Therefore, foster freedom from clinging and all mental constructs. So we want to understand when we say the middle way, Madhyamika, we have it from Rabjam Rinpoche here. The middle way is the indispensable foundation for realizing the great perfection. And also we have from the likes of Mipam Rinpoche and Longchenpa and others that when we talk about the great perfection, we're talking about the great middle way, the great Madhyamika. When we talk about this middle way, we're talking about that which is free from any kind of dogma or conceptual position. So we don't have any kind of either acquired through education and beliefs or innate, what we call then our innate clinging to self. When we're not caught in this, this is what we call the freedom from extremes. And some people would say, "Oh, I don't believe in anything. I believe in nothing." That's just as much a dogma as anything else. But we'd want to see that here we are talking about emptiness has nothing to do with getting rid of thoughts or just having a blank state of mind. This realization of emptiness is very intelligent, it's very aware, and it's very compassionate. It possesses all the qualities of awakening. And so we talk about this core of luminous wisdom, mind, and compassion. And we would want to be very aware of how we can stray from the path. And ultimately, it's in some of the Upadeshas, it says if we don't have any clingings, then we don't stray. But it's very subtle. Clingings can be very subtle. So-called great meditators who fail to realize this, afraid that their practice will starve itself to death, are zealously torturing themselves. What's the point of that? And this happens that we think, oh, it's not enough to just be present and not enough to just go back to the breath and not enough to relinquish our fixation. There has to be more. Something needs to be fill up the space. And here the point is that we'd want to give up this habit. It's like Rabjam just says, it's like this bird that flies everywhere, and at the end it just has to come back to the boat. Searching endlessly will bring us nowhere, so better to settle in the realization, the experience, the realization of the nature of mind. And once we have that, then we have no fear or difficulty. Nothing threatens. What's the point of keeping track of the coming and goings of thoughts? Wakeful awareness that is beyond the consciousness, Dharmakaya beyond the fundamental consciousness, freedom from the conditioned intellect. I'm sorry to say of these, I'm sorry to say that none of these are actually heard by ordinary beings, and the meaning remains untapped, but I won't say too much about it. So sometimes we think that we continually need to keep track of what's happening in the mind. There's not a sense that we could just relax into the settling the mind. And some people would say, oh, you need to always analyze the thoughts, or you need to keep an eye on what's happening with the mind, what arises in the mind. And they would say, oh, yeah, everywhere there's these cliches. But the fact is, these kind of expressions, wakeful awareness that is beyond consciousness, Dharmakaya beyond the fundamental consciousness, freedom from the conditioned intellect, they're not that ordinary. And particularly it's as far as experiencing this is something that is not often done. So we shouldn't be afraid of actually attempting this. It's essential that we um, go beyond just analyzing or just watching the mind's arisings. We'd want to appreciate the space where this mind, you could say, the abiding reality of the mind, not just sitting there having thoughts and contemplating, and also not being merely aware of what's happening in the mind. Otherwise, we'd say, well, I'm angry now. Well, that's all very good, but we have to also be free of the anger. So it's essential that we receive some instructions and we apply that to transform our being. And what unfortunately could very well happen is that we become jaded. There are profound teachings, but they're very often left ignored. Rabjam Rinpoche explains how instead of attending a teacher and putting the instructions of the teacher into practice, that they where they could transform the mind, then very often the Dharma becomes entertainment, and we just traipse around after teachers. He says the Dharma is a teaching for self-transformation, not merely a form of entertainment. Becoming jaded, the Dharma no longer penetrates one's being. We become like stiff hide. So if we've heard a lot of teachings, we just sort of, oh yeah, whatever. And we don't really care. We lose this, you could say, beginner's mind, or this freshness that really is in awe of the depth of these teachings. All beings have Tathagata, and thus they all possess the cause of Buddhahood. So view all of them as pure and consider their great kindness. So we recognize all beings have the core of enlightenment, and we should embrace them with kindness and compassion. As we've seen before, they have been immensely kind to us, and also their confusion is just fleeting. Innately, they have this pure nature. This we'll see more and more as we progress on the path. And this compassion is essential for progressing to enlightenment. Compassion is basic to enlightenment. If you look in the Bodhicitta chapter of the words of my perfect teacher, Paltry Rinpoche, he bows down to his teacher saying, through your great wisdom, you have realized nirvana. Through your great compassion, you willingly embrace samsara. So we'd want to see the compassion as essential for our journey. Okay, the next chapter is on the 6 parameters, and then the last chapter is then the dedication. Here, by the way, you have this is from the Shechen monastery in Nepal. I'm not sure this actually survived the earthquake. This might actually be a tanka. Anyway, this is Shechen Gyaltsap. So this is Dilkhan Rinpoche's teacher, and also one of the principal students of the great Mipam Rinpoche. So he's the author of this work. Any questions? No questions? Wonderful. Then you must have understood it. Okay. I guess we'll dedicate the merit then. So, let's see here. Oh, by the way, this is Rabjam Rinpoche together with Dingo Chenzo Rinpoche. This is taken by Ani Lodra actually, and it's taken in, if I'm not wrong, in Tashijong in North India in 1973 when Dilgo Khenzo Rinpoche was giving this to the to Kamtra Rinpoche and the yogis and the great lamas and everybody really in Tashijong. So was called the Treasury of Spiritual Instruction, Damatsu. So it was given in 1973. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. So thank you, and see you next week. Yeah, Madhyamika is the middle way. Yeah. Okay. Bye bye.